The phrase Internet of Things, or IoT, has been around for about 2 decades, but in an industry like cybersecurity, where terms and acronyms seem to come and go daily, IoT has had staying power. In fact, it's become ubiquitous. But for all the speed and agility it allows and the innovation that it enables, the technology also poses some significant threats. We'll take a look at the Internet of Things, how security experts are responding to these ever-changing challenges on this edition of No Password Required.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida.
Hello and welcome to No Password Required. I'm Bill McQueen. IoT refers to the interconnectivity via the Internet of computing devices embedded in everyday objects. Another way to describe IoT is the convergence of operation technology and information technology. The IoT includes gadgets we have in our own homes, tools we use at work, and conveniences we enjoy in our vehicles. The estimated number of IoT devices worldwide today is about 27 billion. That's billion with a B. That's nearly double the number that existed 4 years ago, and that total is expected to double again by 2023. The artificial intelligence and the wireless technology that enable IoT is changing entire industries. My guest on this edition of No Password Required is Ed Cabrera, the Chief Cybersecurity Officer for Trend Micro, a leading provider of data security and cybersecurity solutions for customers around the world. Before joining Trend Micro, Ed spent 20 years with the Secret Service, where his duties included, among other things, serving as Chief Information Security Officer. He led investigations into large-scale data breaches and investigations into transnational cybersecurity groups that targeted the financial and retail sectors. Ed also served as an advisor to the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Ed, welcome to No Password Required.
Bill, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Our pleasure. Thank you. The Internet of Things, or IoT, has become somewhat of a catch-all phrase. As a cybersecurity expert, how would you define IoT? And for the layman, how does it work? How are all these things tied together?
Well, actually, you made a great intro in describing what IoT is. Another term is used, the Internet of Everything. So arguably what's happened is the convergence of many different things. And you mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning, but also the massive growth of mobile, right? So a vast majority of these devices have become commoditized, off the shelf. So whereas IoT devices have a big footprint, let's say on the consumer side at home, and smart home devices, and the growth areas there is tremendous. But there's also a growth area on industrial IoT devices. So essentially, these devices are sensors that are able to communicate to the Internet. So to provide data information, so it could be a thermostat, it could be your TV. So the level of devices that are connected to the Internet are vastly changing, right? So we usually, in terms of connecting to the Internet, we only think of, say, mobile or laptops and desktops. So now that entire, say, attack surface has grown exponentially. So from a threat perspective, you're looking at a big problem, right? Because now, because of these devices are easily and commercially available, to be able to improve productivity, automation within businesses, you find there's going to be this problem that you mentioned, this converge of IT, information technology and operational technology. And what that does is create this hyper-connected businesses and organizations that create vast amount of opportunities for threat actors to identify, be able to enumerate, and then be able to attack.
So the same speed, access, interconnectivity that makes everything work also gives doors to people who want to steal information, data.
Absolutely. It creates, sadly, efficiency and productivity for the cybercriminals as well. And again, cloud plays a huge enabler because cloud is the area where you're going to be providing that control plane for all these IoT devices. And so, and that creates that exponential growth because of that. So it doesn't have to be an on-premises solution for companies and organizations. They can offload this to the cloud. So that creates another layer. But I think the sectors, from a sector perspective, it's interesting. I mean, you have the retail sector, you have point of sale systems, you have payment systems going to mobile, going to other kiosks. You have medical devices that are moving into the wearable area, so wearable medical devices. So I think any sector that is actually heavily investing in digital transformation, meaning mobile, cloud or IoT, is going to be impacted.
It would almost be easier to name industries that aren't
Absolutely,
involved.
absolutely. And I think what really important to note is that traditionally, because now we've always talked about the threat to critical infrastructure, right? Power, water, any type of utilities that might impact cities or companies or organizations, which is just still the threat. But I think even the traditional critical infrastructure organizations have sort of been, not so much recently, but in the distant past, have been sort of protected by this security by obscurity. In other words, one, the threat actors haven't really been focused on them as much because there hasn't been really a monetary gain.
You're listening to No Password Required.
Do you find that the people who are the engineers, the designers, the programmers, who are putting together this technology and making it work, are they concerned about security, or is that kind of they put it together and the security becomes the problem with people like you?
Well, I think I'd say traditionally that has been, when you look at IT and look at the problems from an IT security and InfoSec security, that has been the problem in the past, right? So cybersecurity has always been seen as the bolt-on solution. But I think now, I think everybody's sort of understanding the benefits of managing this type of risk, right? Because now the risk has really shifted from, say, reputation type of risk of data breaches. Now we get into operational risk associated with digital extortion and these IoT DDoS attacks, these distributed denial of service attacks. Impact operations is at the forefront. So I think there is a much better cooperation and collaboration that is happening from developers, from a DevOps perspective, but it's also, I think, even from the executives. Because truly, when you look at it from an organization, that type of problem, pushing from the CISO and the information security team, building it in from the beginning through sort of baking security in is critical, and that is the only way to go forward. And so the only way you do that is from top-down leadership, collaboration. So I think CISOs today have to work on the communication and collaboration skills much more, because they really have to do a better job of aligning their work to the business mission, right? So they really need to go from saying no, which, unfortunately we've had that reputation for many, many years, and we need to go from no to how, right? Being the enablers, right, within this technology.
Can you cite any specific examples where cyber thieves use the technology to break into or steal data or hold companies, governments, what have you, for ransom?
Yeah, I mean, from an IoT perspective, I think there has been recent cases where one in particular was a known casino that had their fish tank thermostat being leveraged to be able to, the cybercriminals were able to compromise that thermostat and then pivot into their production or their enterprise side. Now, I don't know the details, but it's been widely reported. So we also know that IoT devices from the Mirai botnet and the impacts of the Mirai botnet, that is constantly morphing, being able to compromise IoT devices. So at Trend Micro, the big thing that we do is we do a lot of research. We have over 450 threat researchers around the globe. And a big push for us is research and innovation around IoT, machine learning, and AI. And the IoT piece is very critical because of the security reason, but also is we need to come at it from a different mindset. Traditionally, security has always been, okay, endpoint security, and that's it. I think going at the IoT problem is then coming at it from a holistic perspective from an IoT piece is providing security not only as much as you possibly can on that endpoint device, network, and then cloud, right? And so having this holistic approach of going after it. But our researchers are constantly trying to look at how this types of attacks are happening. And then one example we've seen the Mirai botnet is that it's been resurging again, right? So we've seen, because we have so many global sensors and we're picking up this Mirai botnet and certain variances of the Mirai botnet coming out and being able to be used. It's pretty concerning because when you look at from a distributed denial of service attack, it's already been proven that that's a powerful weapon to knock down enterprises, knock down sites, and so forth.
In being in this fight, I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah.
It's a fight. You've talked about and you've written about the need for new skills for a new fight. Specifically, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think we've sort of highlighted some of the skills here. So I think, right now, IoT, focusing on students that are either in school or students that are upskilling, like the program here at University of South Florida is fantastic. I'm going to speak to some students a little later on this exact same topic. And I think if there's the technical skills, which IoT, you need to obviously expansion into cloud, right? Understanding the fundamentals of cloud, but also how security, works in the cloud. And then I think the thing that I think the big area is from a data science perspective, right? So I think there is a huge, we talk about cyber skills gap issues that we have around the country, around the globe. And I think what you're looking at is another problem on the horizon, but nobody's talking about it, and it is the machine learning and AI skills gap. Because it's twofold. It's not necessarily just more engineers to understand the algorithms and the models to be used, but machine learning and AI, what is critical about it is the fact is your data, right? So you need to have a very good knowledge of your domain. So in this sense, you need to have cybersecurity skills, your basic cybersecurity skills, but then now you need to really understand essentially data science. So not only where organizations store data, transmit data, and also understand that life cycle of data throughout any process that organization does. And so what's unique is whereas IT security and even OT security in some respects have a lot of similarities across different organizations, right? There's best practices and so forth. With the machine learning piece, to make it really effective, you need to have relevant data, right, within your organizations. So mastering not only the data science, but also understanding the basic cybersecurity skills. So that's the technical side. I think the other piece is very important is the communication, the soft skills. I don't think we really focus on that a lot or talk about that enough, because it's really the creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, or the soft skills that are really needed, but also the communication piece, because it's incredibly important now for somebody who's working as a SOC analyst all the way up to the CISO need to be able to communicate the problem that they're having in such a way that those in that or that targeted audience understands. And so, for example, CISOs today need to be able to be that instead of the Chief Information Security Officer, they need to be the Chief Translating Officer. They need to translate the technical back into the business side and understand that when they talk to the board and executive leadership, regardless of what the problem is, be it a threat or a vulnerability, they need to understand and highlight and tell the story. Because that's the last piece on the soft skills is storytelling. They need to be able to put it in such a way that the board members and executive teams understand what the problem is, what the risk is, and how to mitigate that risk. Because oftentimes it's, we talk about the technical problem of how sometimes it's hard to sort of explain, but it's also some of the folks that really have that knowledge is getting it out of them in such a way for a lot of the rest of that organization to understand.
You're listening to No Password Required.
We've talked about skills, we've talked about attitudes, philosophies, if you will. What about just numbers? Is the cybersecurity industry still facing a personnel shortage?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the cyber skills gap, I think, hovers around 300,000 openings right now in the United States.
So it's not just skills, it's actual numbers of people.
Actual numbers of people.
And how are we responding as a nation? And it's not just a nation, it's worldwide. How are we responding to meeting that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're responding well enough. That's one. I think what we need to happen is, because the problem is this, not only do we have a problem of skill development, we have people, the amount of people. We don't have enough people. So some of that, yes. I mean, some of the work that we're seeing in cybersecurity and elsewhere around automation, machine learning is going to be able to help close those gaps a little bit. So they're developing applications in short iterations to improve quality or production, and then they're able to put out new features and functions within the software to meet the demand, right? So, but that's almost the same model that we need to do when it comes to workforce development, is that we need, instead of the operators, which are, I would say, private industry, and the developers are actually higher education, and then obviously the testers are the testers. It's the testing community. I think really coming together and being able to quickly put out education. So instead of microservices, so to speak, you're putting out micro skills. Right. So, I mean, I think that way we're able to do it. Another big initiative now coming out of the federal government, and I'm a big fan of, is the apprenticeship model. Apprenticeship models have been working in other sectors for many, many years. So the Department of Labor is really doubling down on trying to encourage and promote apprenticeship programs around cybersecurity and AI. So
starting younger.
Absolutely. And so, not even to mention that, I think the kids have the aptitude today from a K through 12 perspective that my son, who's 12, I believe that he can pass the CompTIA A+ test just because the work and the things that he's been doing from a coding perspective and just the things that he's been working on as a kid. I think the aptitude is there where a lot of us, we didn't have those opportunities, right? So I think definitely from a K through 12 perspective, having the opportunity for kids to be able to get cybersecurity education in programs in high school, but also where they get certifications in high school, and then where they can get a lot of mentorship from universities, from private industry. Because I think ultimately, wouldn't it be great that once they come out of high school, we talk about, the basketball things and so on. So wouldn't it be great to have a signing day, right, for kids coming out with 3 certifications, a little bit of experience, some internship with a company, and be able to get a job right away. So yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different ways we can go at it, and I think we're on the verge of everybody's coming to the table, and I think everybody wants to help. But yeah, it's still a high mountain to climb.
You're listening to No Password Required.
We are back. This is No Password Required. I'm Bill McQueen, and my guest today is Ed Cabrera, Chief Information Security Officer for Trend Micro. We've been talking about the threat to industry, but you touched on also that we have IoT devices in our homes. Briefly, what do people don't know or overlook or ignore when it comes to the Alexas that we use and everything else in our home? What would you advise people about that?
I think the number one thing is that we need to get or shift our mindset. So now when we actually open up a brand new laptop, mobile device, maybe even an iPad, we are starting to think about security. Do I have a VPN? Do I have some level of security on this laptop? And I think we need to have that same mindset with the IoT devices that we buy. So from a Trend Micro perspective, we've been partnering with companies and manufacturers. We actually announced a partnership with Panasonic around securing their infotainment systems for vehicles. So, and we also have a partnership with ASUS routers, so for home networks. The idea is to be able to sort of bake that security into the actual products when customers get it. But the culture and the training and awareness piece is taking that next step, looking for that particular security. And we're not the only ones in the industry doing it, but looking for the potential of having, and I would say even first and foremost, before you buy a product, see if there is a security element to it or an embedded security program before you even buy it. And maybe that's a differentiator. Secondly, when you do buy it, two things. One is obviously the security piece, but also the one is the no-brainer potentially is the configuration. Right, so a lot of these times, unfortunately, a lot of these IoT devices, they're coming out fast and furious, and
they do more and more things.
And they do more and more things, and the challenge is that some of the basic, say, password, requirements in there are hard-coded or default passwords. So first and foremost, if there's a password option, so hopefully if there is none, you shouldn't use it. But if there is one, make sure you change the default password. The vast majority of these IoT botnets that we're seeing and detecting and blocking are going after brute force credential stuffing attacks against these devices. So the idea is that once they have that potential hard-coded password, which in all consumer electronics nowadays, or historically for quite some time, you can find now these manuals online and look through them and look through those PDFs, and you can probably see what the default password is written in the manual, right? So it's not like they have to go very far to compromise these IoT devices. So one, I guess I had them sort of one before the other, but configuration first, security second.
And use your head.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest problem that we're going to have going forward is that we're going to continue to add devices.
Let's look at some other issues facing cybersecurity. Hacking into medical records has increased dramatically over the last 3 years. One report I saw said it's the leading victim of break-ins. And in doing a little bit of research, one expert said it's not the medical information per se that they want access. How does that work?
I would say it's, yes, I agree that it's not necessarily the medical information. Like they don't want to know your results from your test.
If I broke my arm 2 years ago.
Now, different, cyber threat actors have different motivations, right? So your cyber espionage, them conducting a targeted attack on individuals, be it political personalities and or those in the government and military, absolutely. They might want to know what you're being tested for and what the results were. However, the vast majority of the criminal, or rather the cyber activity, malicious cyber activity, is the cyber criminals. So for them to really monetize your medical records, they're not there yet. And I'll give you a use case later that we haven't seen, but the vast majority has been around because they're complete records. They're complete financial records. They're complete, you understand from a health perspective, it's not so much a health, but it's financial, home address, and this and that and the other. So when you look at other data breaches where they might just get your credentials or they might get your social security number, but they might not have your address. Right. The only unique exceptions, obviously, an Equifax or something like that has a complete record. But other than getting your credit report that has a real complete picture, your next best record is going to be, from a healthcare organization. So I think the reason why that has been the focus is the fact that they are able to monetize it directly as a complete record, or parse it, sell it to different organizations. Because the one thing you have to understand from a cyber criminal perspective, we talk about how eBay and Amazon has sort of created this global e-commerce wave that we've been enjoying, and it's going to grow for quite some time. Well, we had a parallel ecosystem growing in Eastern Europe. And so at that same time, you had cyber criminals utilizing the same technology platforms and even cultural norms within the cybercriminal underground to develop their own ecosystem. So what you have now is this marketplace, incredibly mature, where they provide cybercriminal services end to end. And so this data, this large, full data, then becomes a commodity within the criminal underground, right? They're able to then parse and sell it to other individuals. You might have a spamming campaign that just might want the emails address. You want an identity theft crew that wants the complete home address and this and that and the other, the work address. Then you have business email compromises. It might have the employer's name, right? Because when you fill out your records when you go to the hospital, they say who's, which insurance and which company is it. Now they have an understanding of who they might target within that organization based on that health record. And you might have a business email compromise attack that might happen. So it just becomes that full record. And when you look at cyber criminals, very similar to, entrepreneurs and everybody else within the business world, it's all about return on investment. So do you attack or do all this effort to be able to attack this one organization and get a limited data set where you can attack this particular organization and get a complete data set?
It seems like the tactics are changing, the targets are changing. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about ransomware.
Yes.
Small businesses have been hit. I believe there was an attorney in Tallahassee where someone got in and I believe it was a woman froze her files. She ended up paying several $100s, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for the thief, it was a quick several $100s. Cities have been hit. Lake City here had to pay out close to $500,000
Yep.
because all their IT systems were frozen. There was a city in Georgia, I believe, paid $800,000. There have been attacks in Baltimore, not just small cities, Baltimore, Atlanta. Are we seeing more of that? And is that a sign that the criminals are changing their tactics?
Absolutely. So what you see, as I was saying earlier, you have this vast criminal underground. They sort of communicate and collaborate, very akin to tech startups, right? It's a meritocracy. They come together based on their skills and they're able to really come together and do a lot of damage. With ransomware, the unique thing there is that if you look at a traditional data breach, I always talk in terms of, say, a cybercrime handbook. I mean, the first two chapters about who you're going to attack and then you conduct your attack. Data breaches, the vast majority of those chapters are dedicated to finding the data, exfiltrating that data, then parsing it and then reselling it. So it could take months for these criminal enterprises to be able to get a return on their work.
They risk, I didn't mean to interrupt, but they risk exposure the longer that takes.
Absolutely, because it's that dwell time. When the cybersecurity world, dwell time is a bad time because that's the amount of time they have within an organization. And so from a network defender perspective, we're always trying to reduce that dwell time. But ransomware, dwell time doesn't matter because it is highly automated now at this point. And so I'll talk about the evolution there. But it is from a criminal enterprise perspective, they've shortened that sort of life cycle for them to get paid. They're able to then monetize within minutes, hours, or days. And so that's why that line of business, so to speak, within the criminal underground is pretty much growing. I mean, digital extortion is here to stay. I mean, it's just going to constantly evolve. So that evolution, what it looks like in ransomware, has been, right? So the mid-2000s, coming out of Eastern Europe and the Russian-speaking criminal underground, you had ransomware attacks. It's a commodity type of attack going after consumers. It went from it was actually a locker variant, so they would just lock you out of your computer. And then it shifted in 2015 to 14 to 15 when we started seeing the change in the types of ransomware. So we actually saw it, on our detections that it went from locker variant being the 80% to the very next year shifting to the crypto ransomware that we see today as the majority 80%. It was a complete 180 shift because they realized they could be much more lethal and have much more impact with the crypto ransomware. And so just to give you an example, I think in 2015 we were blocking around about maybe I think it was 92 unique ransomware families, and that shifted to about 247 the following year. So it was a 752% increase in ransomware attacks and detections, and we saw about 1 billion attacks that year. So 16 was that banner year for ransomware. The unique thing here is, so we talk about the evolution going consumer to now enterprise. Now we've seen from like a spray and pray mentality coming out from the 2016 timeframe. Now what we're seeing is that they're being much more targeted. We've seen a huge drop, and I think everybody in the industry has seen a big drop in the amount of ransomware attacks. What has changed is that they've become much more targeted, going back to what you were saying. Now we've seen that there's been a hybrid approach to some of these attacks where we talk about automation, how automation is improving everything that we do in life, and businesses are doing it. Cybercriminals are doing the same thing, the automation piece. Now we're seeing cybercriminals highly automating their attacks, but they're getting to the point where once they compromise a network, they're able to then decide, do I do crypto mining and drop crypto mining malware, or do I drop ransomware, or do I do both? And to the extent that they're actually automating those initial steps much, much more. And so now they have the opportunity to say, okay, let me sit back. I've had this targeted approach, but now of this targeted approach of say 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 folks that we've targeted, now which ones are probably going to be the ones that pay? And then you're seeing where this impact, like I was saying earlier from an IoT problem, is the operational impact from digital extortion. Now, companies and organizations that have really not necessarily had to fend off cyber attacks, manufacturing, other forms of production, now are having to fight it off. When WannaCry hit, you actually, and it was an unintended consequence, I'm sure, because I don't think it was targeted in that nature. But when WannaCry really hit hard, you had automotive manufacturing plants shut down. I think it was Nissan, Honda, and then I believe Renault. So that was that summer that when WannaCry was starting to hit, that they were impacted. So, I mean, I think what we're seeing is the evolution of the technology that they're using, so the evolution of the ransomware. And then we're also seeing a higher level of targeting because they, again, going back to a return on investment. If they attack certain parts of vulnerable critical infrastructure sectors, and government is one of them, they know they're going to get paid. And obviously we've seen this evidence. The other thing I want to say is that also coming out of the criminal underground in that evolution has been an evolution of cybercrime as a service. So I highlighted a little bit of that before, but now we're having these criminal crews develop a end-to-end capability to for those who want to be able to monetize ransomware. So you might not be skilled or as skilled that you might need to say, launch a campaign to make money. However, you can come to me or another group or crew who's delivering end-to-end service. So they'll help you pick the ransomware of your choice, help you pick the demographic of who you're going to attack, and then obviously, of course, they're going to handle the payment for you. So the payment system and processing, they'll do it for you. And then also if there's any kind of customer support, because mind you, from automation and crime as a service, support is there as well, shockingly enough. So you as a victim can actually talk to somebody on a phone now, probably when you're attacked, so they can walk you through the steps to pay the ransom.
And protect themselves at the same time.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing any example, and I was thinking as you were saying that, where in monetizing it, where a company hires someone to go hurt a competitor? I mean, you mentioned factories being shut down. If I own a company and I can shut my competitor down for 2 weeks, it's going to improve my position. Are we seeing any evidence of that?
I don't have any personal knowledge of that, but truly they're only limited by their imagination, right?
Industrial espionage has been around for decades.
And proxies, right. and proxies is a big thing now when we look at nation-state actors. Typically before, it was, I would say, okay, nation-state actors were categorized in different groups based on their capability and their motivations and what they were going for. Now what we've seen from an evolutionary perspective is that now a lot of these nation-state actors are moving into cybercrime because they know they can then make some money at it as well. And or the notion of proxies that are doing a little bit of both, moonlighting in either area.
Virtual mercenaries.
Absolutely.
We're almost out of time, but let me ask you this. Looking ahead, nobody has a crystal ball, but what's the next battleground do you see in cybersecurity?
I think arguably it's going to be this whole notion of automation and AI and machine learning. I mean, I think as we develop our capability and close that gap, hopefully, the cybercriminals and nation-state actors are doing the same thing. I took a picture over the weekend where I actually saw an article, and it showed some celebrities that were aged, and I forget whatever the news outlet was, but it was shocking how realistic these images look like. So they're real faces, real folks. And I did the same to myself, and I sent it to the family. And I mean, I look like my grandfather. I mean, it's the level of machine learning models and the way they're growing. So the problem is this, going back to the over macro problem. We have, from a technology problem that is growing exponentially, but our cybersecurity defenses, workforce development is linear. So we need to be able to sort of match that exponential growth because, to be honest, cyber threat actors have no problems in being able to scale. That's the one unique thing, even from a cyber criminal perspective. They are incredible at coming together and trusting each other. They're able to scale trust better than governments and private industry and academia do now today. I mean, that's our biggest deficit right there, is being able to scale trust. So if they want to be able to move in a certain direction, they do it like that, right? And in the end, they have to be right only once, and we as network defenders have to be right 100% of the time. So
it's a tough job.
Absolutely.
We've been talking with Ed Cabrera, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for Trend Micro. He's been our guest on No Password Required. I'm Bill McQueen. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida. To hear other episodes of No Password Required, visit cyberflorida.org/podcast.